We think we know poverty, but in 1347, a French peasant no one remembers, no title, no land, no future, was walking through an oak forest outside Périgord when his pig stopped dead. She started digging. What came out of that ground was black, ugly, and smelled like something between garlic and the earth after rain. He had no idea he was holding the most expensive food in human history. And here's what nobody tells you. That same black lump, found by a starving peasant who couldn't read, couldn't vote, and owned nothing, is today selling for prices that would make a Wall Street banker flinch. But the story of how it got from that forest floor to a Michelin-starred restaurant in Tokyo is not a story about luxury. It's a story about lightning gods, witch trials, a pope who changed everything, and a fungus so mysterious that for 1,000 years, nobody could even agree on whether it was a gift from heaven or a curse from hell. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever eaten a truffle? Or have you only ever seen the price tag and walked away? Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that price tag exists, why it always will, and why the medieval peasant who first dug one up was sitting on a fortune he never got to keep. Before we go anywhere, we need to settle something. A truffle is not a mushroom, and most people call it that. Chefs call it that. Restaurant menus call it that. They're wrong. A truffle is the underground fruiting body of a fungus from the genus Tuber. And the difference matters, because everything that makes truffles extraordinary comes directly from the fact that they live entirely beneath the surface of the earth. A mushroom pushes up through the soil, it spreads its spores through the wind, it's visible, accessible, harvestable. A truffle does none of that. It grows in complete darkness, 5 to 10 centimeters underground, attached to the roots of specific trees, oak, hazelnut, poplar, beech, in a relationship so intimate and so ancient that scientists have a specific name for it: ectomycorrhizal symbiosis, which is a complicated way of saying the truffle and the tree need each other to survive. The tree gives the truffle carbohydrates, the sugars it produces through photosynthesis. The truffle gives the tree something back, enhanced access to water and minerals, phosphorus, nitrogen, things the tree's own roots can't reach alone. It's a partnership, a deal struck underground in silence over millions of years. And here's the number that should stop you cold. The genus Tuber, the truffle family, has existed for an estimated 85 to 200 million years. That means truffles were growing in the dark long before the first human being ever walked the earth, long before the first oak tree existed, long before anything we would recognize as civilization had even begun. This thing is ancient in a way that makes human history look like a footnote. But ancient doesn't explain expensive. For that, we need to understand the one problem the truffle never solved. It's underground. Nobody can see it. Nobody can smell it from the surface. So how does it reproduce? It can't use wind. It can't use water. It can't push a seed out into the world. So over millions of years, it developed something else entirely. It learned to smell irresistible. Truffles produce over 200 volatile organic compounds, alcohols, ketones, sulfur molecules, that diffuse slowly upward through the soil and into the air above. To the right nose, that smell is impossible to ignore. And one of those compounds, androstenol, is chemically almost identical to a sex pheromone found in the testicles of wild boars, which is why for 500 years the most reliable truffle hunter in Europe was a female pig. She wasn't trained. She didn't need to be. Her own biology drove her directly to the scent, snout down, digging before her handler could even catch up. The problem, and there was always a problem, was that she also desperately wanted to eat it. Handlers spent centuries developing the art of the distraction. An acorn, a piece of bread, anything to get the truffle out of the ground before the pig got there first. In 1985, Italy finally banned truffle pigs altogether. Not because they weren't effective, because they were too effective. Their aggressive rooting destroyed the delicate root systems and mycelia that future truffles needed to grow. Today the industry runs on dogs, Lagotto Romagnolos, Brittany Spaniels, animals trained from puppyhood to find the scent and sit. Not dig, not eat, just sit and wait for their handler. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before any of this became an industry, before there were handlers and dogs and auction houses and Michelin stars, there was a medieval peasant in a forest who had no idea what he'd found. And the world around him was absolutely terrified of it. Here's what most people don't know. Before the Middle Ages turned the truffle into a symbol of evil, The ancient world treated it like a gift from the gods, literally. The Sumerians were eating truffles somewhere between 3000 and 4000 BCE. Neo-Sumerian inscriptions describe the Amorites combining them with legumes and vegetables, one of the earliest documented recipes in human history. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were eating them. Khufu, the man who built the Great Pyramid, Ramses II. These were not men who ate ordinary food. And truffles appeared at their tables, prepared with a coating of goose fat to preserve moisture in the desert heat, and placed as offerings to the gods in tomb frescoes that still exist today. Then came the Greeks. Theophrastus, the man Aristotle called the father of botany, looked at the truffle and was genuinely baffled. No roots, no stem, no leaves, no visible seeds. It appeared to grow from nothing. His conclusion: spontaneous generation. The earth simply produced them, especially after lightning struck during autumn rains. And that theory, lightning creates truffles, became one of the most persistent ideas in the ancient world. The Romans ran with it completely. If lightning came from Zeus, from Jupiter, then truffles were the children of the gods, literally created by divine intervention, struck into existence by the king of the heavens himself. Roman poets wrote about them: Juvenal, Plutarch. They described a triad, water, heat, and lightning, as the necessary conditions for truffle birth. And then the Romans added something else to the truffle's mythology: Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Pliny the Elder, writing in his Naturalis Historia, documented what Roman society already believed, that truffles were a powerful aphrodisiac, that eating them stirred desire, that they carried the energy of Aphrodite herself. The Roman gourmet Marcus Gavius Apicius served them at banquets alongside exotic birds and honeyed wines. They were centerpieces, status symbols, proof that you had access to something the ordinary world could not touch. For over 3,000 years, from the Sumerians to the fall of Rome, the truffle was celebrated, revered, and consumed by the most powerful people on earth. And then everything changed. When the Roman Empire collapsed and the Catholic Church rose to fill the power vacuum across Europe, it brought with it a new way of looking at the world. And in that new world, the truffle had a serious problem. It grew underground, in darkness, with no visible origin, no seeds, no roots, no explanation. It smelled powerfully, almost overwhelmingly, of something primal and animal. It had been associated with pagan gods, with Aphrodite, with sexual desire, and it was black. For the medieval church, this was not a complicated calculation. The truffle became the food of witches, the evil ferment of the earth. The Holy Inquisition in France didn't just discourage truffle consumption, they banned it. Eating a truffle was, in the eyes of the Inquisition, evidence of involvement with satanic practices. The black colour, the underground growth, the mysterious appearance, the pagan associations, all of it pointed in one direction. And so the truffle, which had fed pharaohs and Roman emperors, which had been called a gift from Zeus himself, virtually disappeared from European cuisine for nearly 700 years. Between the 5th and 12th centuries, there is almost no written record of truffles being eaten in Western Christendom. 7 centuries of silence. But here's what's fascinating. While Europe was burning truffle hunters as witches, the Islamic world was doing something completely different. Avicenna, Ibn Sina, one of the greatest physicians in human history, was documenting the truffle's medicinal properties. Treatments for eye disorders, remedies for general weakness. The Prophet Muhammad himself had spoken of truffles as beneficial. The same fungus. 2 civilizations, completely opposite responses. And in the monasteries of Western Europe, those quiet islands of preserved knowledge, Benedictine monks were doing something quietly radical. They were writing it down, not celebrating it, not eating it, but cataloguing it, preserving fragments of Pliny and Theophrastus, keeping the knowledge alive in botanical studies, tucked between remedies for fever and instructions for growing medicinal herbs. Because of those monks, the truffle was not forgotten. It was waiting. In 1309, a pope moved. Pope Clement V relocated the entire papal court from Rome to Avignon, in the south of France. And Avignon sits in the middle of some of the most naturally truffle-rich land in Europe. The oak forests of Provence, the limestone soils, the specific geology that truffles require, secondary and tertiary sedimentary layers, with high exchangeable calcium content. Truffles were everywhere. And suddenly, the most powerful religious institution in the Western world was surrounded by them. The reconciliation was not announced. There was no papal decree declaring truffles acceptable. It happened quietly, practically, inevitably. Truffles began appearing at ecclesiastical banquets. The clergy discovered what the ancient Romans had known for centuries. And once the church stopped condemning the truffle, the nobility moved fast. By the late 14th century, Prince Jean de Berry, one of the most powerful nobles in France, was receiving baskets of truffles as gifts and spreading them at the French court. But the transformation wasn't complete until the truffle received something it had never had before: a saint. Saint Anthony the Great, the patron saint of lost objects, became the official protector of truffle hunters. In the regions of Provence and the Langue, truffle masses were established in his honour. And during these ceremonies, something extraordinary happened. Congregants placed black truffles on the offering plate instead of money. Not coins, not grain, truffles. This tradition, a medieval peasant placing a black fungus on a church offering plate as an act of devotion, still happens today in the town of Richranchy, in Provence. The same ritual, 700 years later, the truffle had gone from the devil's fruit to a gift from God. And that transformation, that complete reversal of meaning, is what opened the door to everything that came next. Here's the part of the truffle story that almost never gets told. While the nobility was discovering truffles at court banquets, and the church was quietly reversing 7 centuries of condemnation, the people who actually knew where the truffles were had known all along. The peasants. For generations in the forests of southern France and northern Italy, rural families had been finding truffles and keeping their mouths shut about it. Not because they were eating them. They couldn't afford to eat them, because truffles were how they paid their taxes. In the feudal system, the right to gather mushrooms on seigneurial land belonged to the landowner. A peasant who found truffles on a lord's land was often required to hand them over. A form of labour tax, a debt payment, a survival mechanism. But the peasants had something the lords didn't: knowledge. Truffle hunting was passed down through generations as a jealously guarded family secret. The location of a productive truffle bed, a spot where the fungus returned year after year, was worth more than almost anything a peasant family owned. Fathers didn't tell their sons where the beds were until they were dying, literally, on their deathbeds. The location of the truffle beds was the inheritance, and the hunters worked at night. Not because truffles are easier to find in the dark, they're not, but because working at night meant rivals couldn't follow you, couldn't watch where you went, couldn't find what you'd found. The expert foragers knew what to look for: the brûlé, the burned effect. Truffles produce herbicidal compounds that kill the grass and small vegetation around the host tree, leaving a bare, scorched-looking patch on the forest floor. No grass, no weeds, just bare earth in a rough circle around the base of an oak. That bare patch was a map. They also watch for the truffle fly, Suilia gigantea, a small insect that hovers over spots where truffles are maturing underground, drawn by the same volatile compounds that attract pigs and dogs, a hovering fly above bare earth near an oak tree. That was the signal. These were not lucky discoveries. This was a sophisticated, inherited system of ecological observation developed over centuries by people who had no formal education, no scientific instruments, and no margin for error. They were reading the forest, and the forest was telling them exactly where to dig. For centuries, the truffle remained what it had always been: wild, secret, unpredictable, and controlled by the people who knew the forests best. That changed in the early 1800s. A French agronomist named Joseph Taillon made an observation that seems obvious in retrospect, but was genuinely revolutionary at the time. Truffles didn't grow randomly near oak trees. They grew consistently near specific oak trees. Trees that had something in their root systems, something invisible, something fungal, that other trees didn't have. And when Taillon planted acorns from those specific trees, the young oaks that grew from them began producing truffles within a few years. He had discovered mycorrhization, the inoculation of tree roots with fungal spores, without having the scientific vocabulary to describe it. What he had instead was results. The first controlled truffle orchards, truffières, were established in the Périgord region of France, and they worked. By the end of the 19th century, France was producing hundreds of tons of black truffles annually. Then came the disaster that accidentally created the Golden Age. In the 1860s, a microscopic insect called Phylloxera arrived in France from North America and began destroying the vineyards. It was catastrophic, one of the worst agricultural disasters in European history. Entire wine regions were wiped out. Farmers tore up dead vines by the thousands of acres, and many of them replanted with Talon's truffle oaks. The hillsides of France that had grown wine for centuries began growing truffles instead. Production exploded. The late 19th century became the golden age of the truffle, a period of abundance that has never been repeated. Truffles became more accessible than they had ever been. The middle class could afford them. They appeared in markets, in homes, in ordinary kitchens, and then slowly it ended. The 20th century brought industrial agriculture, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, mechanized farming that had no patience for the slow, unpredictable rhythms of truffle production. The truffières were abandoned, the knowledge of how to maintain them faded, and the wild truffle populations, already dependent on specific geological conditions, specific tree relationships, specific climates, began to collapse under the pressure of deforestation and changing weather patterns. In France, truffle production has fallen from over 1,000 tons per season in the 19th century to just 30 tons today. 30 tons, a collapse of more than 97%. And that collapse, that near disappearance of something that once grew in abundance, is the single most important reason why a truffle costs what it costs today. In 2014, the world's largest white truffle was discovered in Italy. It weighed nearly 2 kilograms. It was flown to New York accompanied by a security guard. It sold at auction for $61,000 for a fungus, for something that grew in the ground, that no one planted, that no one watered, that appeared because of a specific combination of soil chemistry, tree roots, rainfall, and temperature that cannot be fully controlled or predicted even today. The Italian white truffle, tuber magnatum, is the most expensive food by weight on Earth. Prices regularly exceed $3,000 for half a pound, and unlike the black Périgord truffle, which can now be cultivated with some reliability, the Italian white has resisted almost every attempt at farming. Nobody knows exactly why. The conditions it requires are so specific, so dependent on wild soil ecosystems that have developed over centuries, that even the most sophisticated modern cultivation techniques cannot reliably reproduce them, which means every Italian white truffle on Earth is still found the same way it was found in medieval Périgord. A dog, a forest, a handler who knows what bare earth near an oak tree means, and the clock is always ticking. After just 5 days out of the ground, the truffle's scent, that extraordinary cocktail of 200 volatile compounds, has already halved. Within a week, much of what made it worth thousands of dollars is simply gone. This is why truffle hunters work with urgency, why the supply chain from forest to restaurant kitchen is measured in hours, not days. Why a truffle flown from Alba to Tokyo on a Tuesday needs to be on a plate by Thursday. The perishability is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. It is the reason that no factory will ever produce a real truffle. No laboratory will ever synthesize the experience of eating one freshly shaved over warm pasta. And it is the reason that the cheap truffle oil on the supermarket shelf, the one that costs $12 and smells aggressively of truffle, has almost certainly never been within 100 miles of a real one. Most commercial truffle oil is flavored with 2,4-dithiopentane, a synthesized chemical compound that contains one of the main aromatic components of foot odor. That's what you're buying. Foot odor in olive oil. The real thing is something else entirely. When something is worth this much money, it attracts a certain kind of attention. The truffle world has a dark side that the Michelin-starred restaurants and the elegant auction houses don't advertise. Truffle forests are poached. Systematically, professionally, ruthlessly. Trained truffle dogs, animals that have been worked with since puppyhood, that represent years of investment and thousands of euros, are stolen regularly across France and Italy. And in some regions, rival hunters have been known to scatter poisoned meat in the forests, not to kill the truffles, to kill the dogs. Eliminate the competition's dog and you eliminate the competition, at least until they can train another one. Which takes years. This is not ancient history. This is happening now in the same forests where medieval peasants once worked in darkness to protect their family's secret beds. The stakes have changed. The behaviour hasn't. There is also a sophisticated fraud market. Cheap truffle varieties, species that grow more easily, that lack the extraordinary scent profile of the Perigord or the Alba, are stained, treated with synthetic compounds, and sold as premium product. The truffle economy, for all its luxury associations, operates in some places more like a black market than a fine food industry. Which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. This has always been a food that people fought over, that people kept secret, that people lied about and hoarded and protected with everything they had, from the medieval peasant who only told his son on his deathbed, to the modern hunter who finds poisoned meat in his forest. The truffle has always inspired a particular kind of human behaviour, the behaviour of people who know they're sitting on something irreplaceable. Here's what's changed in the last 50 years. The truffle is no longer exclusively European. Through sophisticated cultivation techniques, laboratory mycorrhization of tree saplings, careful soil preparation, constant irrigation, truffle farming has expanded to places that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. Australia is now a major player. Australian truffle farms produce black truffles that rival traditional French and Italian varieties. And because Australia's winter falls during the Northern Hemisphere's summer, when European truffle season is over, Australian truffles fill a gap in the global supply chain that previously didn't exist. The United States, New Zealand, Chile, Spain. The truffle map is expanding, but here's what hasn't changed. The Italian white truffle still cannot be farmed. The wild truffle populations of France are still at 3% of their 19th century peak. Climate change is pushing traditional truffle regions northward. UK scientists predict that some of the most historically productive areas in southern Europe may lose their truffle industry entirely within 50 years. The truffle that survived the Inquisition, that outlasted the Roman Empire, that fed pharaohs and was banned by popes and protected by saints, may be genuinely threatened by the one force it has no evolutionary response to. A planet that is warming faster than its root systems can adapt. So let's go back to that peasant. The one in the forest outside Perigord in 1347, the one whose pig stopped and started digging. He didn't know he was holding something that ancient Egyptians had placed on the altars of their gods. He didn't know that Roman emperors had paid fortunes for it. He didn't know that the church had spent 7 centuries trying to erase it, or that a pope's relocation to the south of France had quietly reversed everything. He didn't know that in the 21st century a single specimen of what he was holding would sell at auction for $61,000. He knew one thing, he knew where to find it, and he wasn't going to tell anyone. That knowledge, passed from father to son in whispered deathbed confessions, protected by night hunts and secret forest paths and generations of deliberate silence, is still the foundation of the entire truffle economy today. The most expensive food on earth is still found the same way it was found in medieval France. A dog, a forest, someone who knows what bare earth near an oak tree means. The technology has changed, the prices have changed, the restaurants and the auction houses and the global supply chains have changed everything around it. But the truffle itself is still down there in the dark, doing exactly what it has done for 200 million years, waiting to be found. Drop a comment and tell me, did you know any of this? Did you know the church banned truffles? Did you know about the poisoned dogs? Because most people see that price tag on a menu and think it's just about exclusivity, about restaurants charging what they can get away with. Now you know the real story. If you want more forgotten history that the modern world buried, history that still shapes the prices you pay and the food you eat and the world you live in, hit that subscribe button. We dig this stuff up every week. And unlike the truffle hunters of medieval Perigord, we're telling everyone where to find it.